full-tilt pro bass action. Big fish, hot sticks, and serious money on the line. There's inside info, tournament tactics, winning tips and techniques. And it's all designed to help you become a better bass angler. This is the Gander Mountain Invitational Pro-Am Bass Tour. Brought to you by Dodge Trucks, Mercury Marine, Triton Boats, and Rapala Lures. Its shape reminiscent of an immense war bonnet draped over the densely forested land it suckles, Leech Lake is the heart and soul of northern Minnesota's Native American culture. For centuries, Leech has been a focal point of conflict. First, between Dakota and Ojibwa tribes, and later, clashes between natives and European fur traders and settlers. Today, Leech Lake is the centerpiece of the vast Chippewa National Forest. Still teeming with fish and wildlife, the wilderness has been tamed to an extent, but only so far as to attract throngs of tourists and sportsmen, hearkening to the irresistible call of the wild that is this enchanted place. For fishermen, Leech is the ultimate destination. The big lake produces big fish in every variety. Huge walleye, jumbo perch, dinner plate-sized crappies, monstrous northern pike, and muskies of terrifying proportions. Same goes for the bass. Although not regarded as a typical largemouth lake, Leech is home to an ever-burgeoning population. And the bigmouth bite is as unique as the lake itself. Here, the bass are in the rice, the reeds, and the rushes, standing fortresses which provide safe haven from the prowling predators of the deep. Which means if you want to catch Leech Lake largemouth, you have to go in and get them. It's early July, following a cold and windy spring. The bass have spawned and are just establishing their summer patterns. But Leech Lake bass don't have conventional summer patterns. No grassy flats, no deep weed lines, no mid-lake humps. Why? Because bass in those locations become musky meat in a Leech Lake minute. Here the pattern is emergent vegetation, either standing as in the cattails and bulrushes, or lay down as in the thick of the rice beds. In the case of the former, cut banks are key. Bass tend to hang in the undercut edges of the walls of vegetation. Here, a shallow crank or a spinnerbait fished parallel to the reeds will help you find fish, and a well-placed jig pitched close to the base will coax out the big ones. If the rice is down, surface spoons and slop skippers are the search baits of choice. And once a bass erupts, a quick follow with a heavy jig will penetrate the cover where those 5-pounders live. And if you get bit, you'd best be geared up for battle. The scene is set for a truly unique challenge as more than 200 anglers venture out to experience the Leech Lake legend for themselves on the Gander Mountain Invitational Pro-Am Bass Tour. A sprawling array of endless points and massive bays, Leech Lake is intimidating to say the least. Miles of vegetation, acres of rice, an eternity of open water, and only one day to fish it. Where do you start? What's the best route to get there? How long do you stay? Wind and weather will definitely be a factor.
This is Leech Lake. It's known as a musky walleye fishery. It's over 100,000 acres. Of its 100,000 acres, only about 5 to 10% of it is good bass fishing. That could prove to be a problem with the long running distances between those areas, but a challenge is always good for a tournament.
Basically, I fish the same way here from the opening of the season till through fall. The bass on Leech spend their summer up in the shallow water, 5 foot or less.
A lot of the lakes around Minnesota and the Midwest seem to have bass depths that range from a foot to 20 plus feet, but in Leech Lake, unless there's something that I'm not aware of, they just don't seem to live in water that's over much more than 6 feet deep. So you're concentrating on a lot of shallow cover, wild rice, bulrushes, cattails.
But if you've ever come out here and had a day where you've caught a dozen 5, 6 pound fish, you get addicted to Leech. You can even have days where you don't catch a thing, don't even get a bite, and it doesn't bother you because you know the next time might be great. And Leech is a classic lake of not catching any fish. They say if you're not getting skunked on Leech, you're not fishing it enough, so.
So, shallow water is the ticket on Leech, but that doesn't narrow things down much. You still have to deal with miles and miles of shoreline, thousands of acres of wheat flats and rice beds, and just a few hours to find them, fish them, and get them in the box. On Leech, two bass patterns are prevalent, the rice and the cane, and the two require completely different approaches.
There's a lot of ways to catch these bass on Leech Lake. One of the things that I like to do is I like to work the edges of the rice, around the perimeters of the rice, and I use what I like to call a circular. I'm using a big flipping stick, of course, with spider wire 50-pound braided line. This is our jawbreaker spoon that actually John and I designed specifically for Leech Lake 25 years ago, 25 years ago. This is a weighted, weedless spoon. And it just works dynamite in this type of cover. I can throw it anywhere and get it through. One of the things I do on Leech Lake is I actually put a trailing stinger hook on it with a grub that gives the bass a little better target as it comes through. But I'll skirt this over the top of the vegetation, over the mats, and then I'll let it fall into pockets as I see them coming through. If they boil up on my jawbreaker and I can't catch them, I will set the jawbreaker down and I'll mark the spot, and I'll pick up a slip sinkered power hog or some type of a power bait, plastic worm of some type, or a jungle jig with pork on it, and then I will pitch back into those areas where the fish showed itself by making a swirl or making an attempt at my bait. That's the one that probably blew on the jawbreaker and threw back in there with a slip sinker tube and got him to bite. It's not exactly the quality of fish that we're looking for on Leech Lake, but the numbers of that size fish are pretty healthy right now, and I think we're looking for some great fishing down the road here.
On Leech, most of the bass are pretty much loners. When they get up in the shallow slop, it's almost like musky fish, and you're searching for one fish at a time, versus on some lakes, where you find one fish, you'll find a few more in the same tight little area. On Leech, they kind of live alone, and you're, like I say, you're looking for one at a time. You'll see some feeding activity going on, but a lot of times it's one fish. If you can mark that fish, and get over there and get a bait in there while he's active, you can generally catch them. There's one.
Leech Lake is a wind-swept lake that's very, very big. The vast majority of the bass live in small confined areas such as these weedy bays, and the bulk of them are in this wild rice. There are a few other areas in Leech Lake that do have weedline fish or other options.
Thick stand-up vegetation calls for different tactics. Think edges, think pockets, think big baits and heavy gear. This is pinpoint vertical assault. The fish are holding tight to cover in classic ambush position, and to catch them, you have to put a bait right in front of their nose.
It's a different lake from most lakes that we fish. The bass seem to be very deep into cover, so they're gonna hide themselves in the back cattail pockets here like I'm trying to flip to with my jig, and a lot of times in the wild rice, they're gonna bury themselves very deep in the wild rice instead of being on the edge. And you don't find much of a weed line pattern out here. I don't know if they're scared of muskies or what the deal is, but they're buried pretty good. But it's fun to fish because when you set the hook, a lot of times they're a 3 and 4 pounder. I think what I'm going to try to do is, since I see quite a few boats that have fished this bay this morning, I'm going to find deeper pockets back in the bulrushes here. I think a lot of times anglers will miss out on the harder stuff to get at, and a lot of times the bass will get pressured back into those areas. So you can't overlook any kind of water out here. If you can see water, there might be a fish in there. You can catch them up as shallow as 6 inches out on Leech.
When you do get bit, you'd best have some serious pulling power working for you. These are some of the biggest fish in the pond, and you'll need heavy gear to winch them back to the boat.
So what I do is I take a St. Croix Legend Elite Series. This is a 7-foot medium. It's medium heavy. I normally run about 15-pound Berkley big game on this rod, but for this lake I'm running 20. And I'll fish with a couple of these, and what I use this one for is mainly fishing in the open reeds, and I'll run 20-pound line, a 4 or 5/0 hook, and a 1/4 ounce tungsten weight. When it gets real thick, or I'm afraid I'm going to have a fish that's going to wrap me up and break me off, then I'll switch to a St. Croix Legend Elite flipping stick. And this one's actually got braid on it. I'll run 65-pound braid. I'll step up to a 3/8 ounce tungsten sinker, and I'll still run the same bait on her. But I'll just pick this rod up in situations where it's real thick, and if you don't have this on, mono will just wrap around there and the fish will shake off. It's happened to me dozens of times. You go with a flipping stick, it gives you more leverage. This line normally won't break, and it'll cut through a lot of this junk when a fish makes a big run. And it's a little more precise fishing. You're just going to be flipping little target spots here and there instead of making casts like I would with the 7-foot rod and the mono. But this is something that you almost have to do on this lake, because if you do get into the fish, you know, and there's fish in here that 5 or 6 pounds. There's one right there. That's a northern. That's another thing with this braid. You can just stand on them like that, and I didn't lose anything. You didn't cut me off. If I'd had mono on that fish, probably would have taken about $1.50's worth of owner white gap hook and tungsten weight right there. So it saves you a little bit of expense, but it also saves you a lot of big fish when they get in there and wrap up.
So there you have it, 2 schools of thought on Leech's Lunker Largemouth. Who's going to put the right pattern together for the $10,000 payday? We'll find out when we come back with all the tournament action from Leech Lake on the Gander Mountain Invitational Pro-Am Bass Tour. Sunrise in central Minnesota. Over 100 of the best bass hunters in the upper Midwest prepare to tackle one of the largest shallow water largemouth sanctuaries in the country. The boiling wakes fan out across giant Leech Lake, each with a specific and likely weed-choked destination. Of course, only one will find the $10,000 Leech Lake motherlode. Will it come from the bulrushes, where we find Jim Smith already halfway to a limit at 8:30 in the morning? Smith is flipping a plastic craw worm into the thick stand-up vegetation and up against the floating cut banks. When active fish are located, they can come pretty quick.
There he is. I like your feeling.
Good one?
So Smith and partner Dan Jasper have a quick limit, but they'll need to contact some bigger fish to make a run at the win. And they may have to look to the rice to find them. Tad Johnson and amateur Jenny Schwab did, and Schwab found a rice giant.
That's sweet.
Jeremy Keel and partner Chuck Saline are also working a giant rice bed and are already upgrading a solid limit. Although these rice beds are massive, Keel concentrates on specific small features.
They're just like, a lion or something. If doesn't have the right angle on it, he isn't gonna waste his energy or waste his ambush position to go after it. So you come at it from a different angle, and then all of a sudden he's coming from the right direction for him, and he hits it. And I mean, I've had that happen about 3 times now, where I just came at same pocket from a different angle, and he hit it when I came from a different angle. But I like to spar stuff like this. They just seem to be able to locate it so much better.
Back in the stand-up cane, we find Micah Raddick. As a Leech Lake rookie, Raddick is learning some valuable big water lessons.
What's unique about Leech Lake are these big bays, and their deepest spot you can find is 5 feet. I totally thought, I knew there was a lot of weeds and a lot of slop fishing out here, but I never knew the water was this clear. I thought it was going to be a kind of a stained color, like rainy lake. I had no idea it was this clear. And that can make fishing tough too. Yeah! That's what I'm talking about. I needed that, baby.
So Raddick is halfway to a limit, with plenty of time left.
That jawbreaker's really working.
Back in the rice, we find Leech Lake veteran John Crane, who's putting on a rice fishing clinic.
And we just flip in the boat. He's not the biggest one, but all bass. Leech Lake largemouth. Jawbreaker spoon was developed on Leech Lake 20 years ago here. You can see we're just throwing it out. Long casts are key, and we're not spooking them. And reel it right over the top, engage your reel before the jawbreaker hits the water, so it's coming at you. And pulling it right over their heads. These fish are just boiling up like a cat on a mouse. And you get them while they're hot. Get the net on this one.
As Crane continues to contact upgrade fish, others are doing the same, including Matt Christie, who's abandoned his shoreline pre-fish pattern in favor of the rice beds. Jeremy Keel and Chuck Saline are still on fish as well. And back in John Crane's boat, the old 1-2 punch is still yanking big bass out of the thick rice.
So yeah, we're just scouting them out with this jawbreaker. He's got a gold one, I'm throwing black. When you get overcast conditions like this on Leech, those fish will scatter and roam around, so we're covering ground, and they're not holding tight. They could be just anywhere.
With fish going in the rice, the rushes, and the cane, it seems Leech Lake is living up to its billing. In fact, when all is said and done, nearly 700 bass will be caught, weighed, and released on this day. But which single limit will weigh enough to claim the $10,000 top prize? The Gander Mountain scale will tell us when we come back on the Gander Mountain Invitational Pro-Am Bass Tour. A brisk Leech Lake breeze greets the Gander Mountain field as Minnesota bass fans gather for the final tally. Lots of crowded live wells line the beach, and a closer look proves this is gonna be a shootout. Jason Howland weighs early and continues his hot streak.
21.94, these guys are now in the lead.
Nearly 22 pounds will give him a 7th place finish. Down on the beach, Jeremy Keel bags a big limit as Ross Taylor takes the stage.
23.29.
That's good for a solid 4th place finish.
Jeremy Keel, I got a rumor you got a huge bag of fish.
Keel hefts his heavy bag to the scale.
We've got a new leader. New leader, 23.51.
So Keel takes over the lead, but there are plenty of bags yet to weigh, including Doug Petrax.
So we need to get higher than 23.51. Gary's been my weighmaster for going on umpteen years here. When he picks a bag up and he says it's more than 23.51, he's not very often wrong. So what do you got now? 23.50. 23.50 is the lock. That's 1/100th of a pound. 23.50 in the lock. Jeremy Keel just passed out back there at 23.51.
Keel dodges a bullet, but Tom Whitehead is ready to take a shot.
Where's Jeremy Keel? Come up here. All right, look at these. 22.98. You're still in the lead, son. All right, you got a big fish? Let's hear it for these guys.
Another challenger goes down, then another.
Ooh, decent bag. 22.46.
And another.
21.40. Nice bag of fish, though.
Until only one remains, and John Crane has a huge bag.
What you got for these boys?
26.49.
26.49. Get him some fish, Gary. Get him to hold them out there.
Saving the best for last, John Crane moves from the end of the line to the top of the heap, winning $10,000 and the Gander Mountain Leech Lake title.
We put the screws to them early this morning. We had a limit by about 8 o'clock, I suppose, and simply worked our milk run and hit about 10 different spots, bounced back and forth. And I guess the real unique thing about Leech Lake, I think darn near every bass in the lake is less than 6 feet deep. The muskies got them all scared up shallow. So anytime you find pads, rice, cane, reeds, go in there, there's bass. I don't care what bay you're on, every bay on this lake has got bass in it. We'd go in and we're throwing jawbreaker spoons. It's a real weedless spoon, throwing it out as far as we can go. We're casting long, we got big, stiff 7-8 foot rods. I got 50-pound test on here. These fish are horses. I mean, you gotta wrestle them out there. They'll come out, they'll blow up at these spoons. You hook about half of them on the spot. The other half, we're coming back with the 1-2 combination. We're throwing our jungle jig right on top of that boil. You gotta mark your spot, throw that jungle jig right on there, and we're snapping them up with that.
So in the end, it was the over-under 1-2 punch in the wild rice that won the day on Leech Lake. Congratulations, John. With just one event remaining in the Minnesota division, Chad Johnson takes over the lead in the Angler of the Year race. Jeremy Keel is just 1 point behind. The top 30 finishers will qualify for the season-ending Tournament of Champions. Over in the Wisconsin division, Jason Slagstad ran away from the field, winning the Lake Wissota event by more than 5 pounds. And in Illinois, the Gander Mountain Pros tackled Pool 13 on the Mississippi River, where Nathan Huss outlasted Rick Miller for the $10,000 win. Next week, the qualifying season comes to an end on Minnesota's whitefish chain of lakes. From the shallow slop of Leech Lake to the deep weeds of whitefish, see how these big bass aficionados attack these late summer largemouth in what will be their last attempt to qualify for the $75,000 Tournament of Champions. That's all next week on the Gander Mountain Invitational Pro-Am Bass Tour. Before we go, we'd like to take one more opportunity to thank our fine sponsors, including Dodge Trucks, Mercury Marine, Triton Boats, Rapala, and all of our other partners who make the Gander Mountain Pro-Am Bass Tour possible.